The knock came at 8:30 in the morning, sharp, militaristic, and patient. Not the welcome buzz of a postman or neighbor. It had the weight of authority, the promise of orders. He was halfway through his cereal when he heard it. 2 quick taps, pause, another 2, and then silence. It repeated. His heart skipped a beat as he set the spoon down and went to the door. 3 men stood on the porch, clad in dark tactical gear, smiles unreadable behind mirrored visors. One held a clipboard, another watched him with an arm cupped at his side, like he might reach for something beneath his jacket. He opened the door slowly. "Good morning," the clipboard man said. His voice was calm, too calm. "We're from the HOA's Compliance Division. There's been a report about custodial concerns. We need to perform a standard child safety audit." He glanced behind them, saw the swing set, the bike propped below the porch. His son should be behind them, but wasn't. "I filed no reports," he said, voice even. "You're due for an audit." They answered in unison. He stepped back. "I'm calling Mike," he said, referring to the main association board president. They shook their heads. "No need." The clipboard man cleared his throat. "We're acting under Safe Start Initiative protocols. Your cooperation is required. We are licensed to ensure compliance, especially when minors and former military personnel are involved." The words landed like bricks. Former military. Usual novice tactic, linking veterans to instability. He swallowed. His wife and son had already been anxious when he returned from overseas. Did they know that detail? Still, he stood firm. There was a pause, like a wave pulling back before swallowing ashore. They stepped aside and left with strange compassion, as if their real mission was to remind him who held the power. He could hear their footsteps on the grass, the car door, the engine. The tape of their threat left behind. Inside, he closed the door, his hand trembling. He breathed deeply. His wife came in from the kitchen. His son stood next to her, pale, watching. He wanted to keep them calm. He pulled them in. He told them the men would be back. He couldn't stop the tears that formed in his wife's eyes. After breakfast, he called Nate, friend, neighbor, the only person he trusted more than family. They met in the garage, the world just beginning to light up outside. "They said safe start," he told him. "A behavioral compliance audit. They tied it to kids and vets. They'll do anything," Nate said. He ran his thumb across his own forearm, designating his service in the Guard. "If this works, they'll do far more." They spent the day documenting, filing HO's bylaws, Safe Start materials, correspondence. They photographed the men's vehicle and badges. They found Safe Start documents online, phases, checklists, algorithms labeled Project Dove. He learned that HOAs across the state quietly signed up for behavioral compliance programs, paying vendors to flag nonconformists, collect data, intervene in family life. He spent the night on guard. His son wouldn't sleep. He slept in his arms on the floor. He didn't sleep either. The fake enforcers returned before dawn the next day. This time, they left a notice affixed to their door. It accused him of parental neglect, veteran-associated risk, and non-participation in community wellness sessions. He felt bile rise. He grabbed it up and tore it in half. That's when he saw it. A raw conviction not born of rules, but fear. Fear dressed up in clipboards and camo. It reminded him of deployments, hiding in corners as rockets crashed overhead. He clenched his fists and pointed to the door. "They're minors," he said. "You have no authority here." The men took a step back. They nodded politely and left. He spent the rest of the day in legal research. Flag Code 209, Safe Start protocols, parental rights statutes. He didn't sleep at night. When the third visit came, they brought files, photographs, emails, screen grabs, manufactured evidence to justify removing his son. They spoke of custodial compliance, psychological review, environmental factors. Words they had no right to use, but trotted out as if law. His son cried. His wife whispered, "Call the police." He dialed. The line rang endless minutes before an officer showed up. He showed the badge, filed a complaint for trespass and impersonation of authority. The officer noted the language was unusual for a typical HOA violation. Safe Start had pushed deeper. These compliance officers carried night vision gear, body cameras, tear gas canisters. Their vehicles had hidden compartments. He recorded the incident. Nate posted it online. Within hours, concerned neighbors formed a watch group. 10 families offered to testify on his behalf if needed. The HOA board tried to intervene, but backed off. Behind the scene, however, the Safe Start network shifted phases. In the briefings he uncovered online, documents about Phase 2, families with veterans and children were being flagged as psychological test subjects. Audio logs normalized trauma-based compliance testing. They were invited to therapeutic meetings. The script used guilt structures to provoke emotional paralysis. When he read one of them, his hand shook. This was pre-crime, pre-court, pre-law. They created guilt before wrongdoing. Obedience before misbehavior. One night, he heard noises under the window. A window shattered. He grabbed Nate's rifle, but, well, he froze. For a moment, that same freeze he'd experienced overseas, that moment of paralysis when terror numbed the body. He thought about holding down the trigger. But his son stood behind him then, in pajamas, eyes wide. He lowered the weapon, turned out the lights, and gathered his son and wife into the closet. They huddled together. The glass tinkled. A voice outside, the same clipboard man, calling out for Jason, for compliance purposes. They waited. He prayed. Then silence. Then, they fled, running back into the night. They reported it. He gathered the shards of glass. He took footage from the door cam. They filed charges for home invasion and attempted kidnapping. It became real now, not psychological games, but physical. He realized his initial goal, to hold them off, no longer seemed enough. He needed offense. He needed to expose them. Nate began contacting media. Safe Start reports leaked. Videos circulated. The scandal exploded. An official investigation into the HOA chairwoman, Karen, began. He avoided the headlines. Not even his son's school knew. He and his wife sat on the floor one night, and he said, They were testing me. She nodded, pulling him close. But you woke up. He believed it then. He would fight. The first public meeting after the scandal broke didn't look like a reckoning. It looked like a town hall. Folding chairs in a fluorescent rec center, a tired podium, and a row of HOA board members who looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. But behind the quiet, John felt the shift. The room buzzed with the silent electricity of people who had stopped trusting the voice on the loudspeaker and started listening to each other. He stood in the back with Nate, watching Karen Whitmore, the chairwoman of the HOA, adjust the mic with shaky hands. Her lipstick didn't hide the panic in her voice. She launched into a practice speech about miscommunication and third-party contractors acting outside of guidelines. But it didn't land. The crowd didn't clap. One woman near the front whispered, "She knew." Another muttered, "They came to my door too." Then the questions started. One by one, residents stepped forward with stories. A man whose garage was searched without permission. A single mother whose child was flagged for routine psychological evaluation because she missed 2 community workshops. An elderly couple whose driveway was cited for pattern noncompliance. Whatever that meant. John listened. And when it was his turn to speak, he didn't hold back. He told them about the fake custody notices, the nighttime break-in, the staged compliance letters. He showed the documents, digital and paper, leaked from inside Safe Start. He read lines from Project Dove, describing early behavioral reformatting opportunities and stress-induced conformity metrics. He asked them if they understood what that meant. They were the test group. Their children were the metrics. And then he showed them the map, the one Nate pulled from a leaked HOA database showing targeted zones. Red dots scattered across suburban neighborhoods, each representing a flagged household, single-parent homes, veterans, non-participants in wellness groups. John's address was one of the first. But it wasn't the last. By the time he stepped down, there were no questions. Just silence. Then the police showed up. Not for him, but for Karen. She left in cuffs. It didn't end there, of course. The system was never just her. She was the face, the delivery mechanism. The rot ran deeper. That night, as Nate and John walked home under the amber haze of streetlights, they talked in low voices. "They'll regroup," Nate said. "I know. Somewhere else. Another name. Another program. I know. So what now?" John looked up. The stars flickered. The wind carried the scent of pine and cut grass. It smelled like memory. "Now we teach others what to look for." Underscore 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 underscore. And so they did. The first workshop was small. 7 people. Then 15. By spring, they had a network. They called it Clear Watch. Not because they promised safety, but because they promised clarity. Each session taught residents how to read HOA charters. How to spot ambiguous language like behavioral compliance or emergency family evaluations. How to recognize staged inspections and document everything. They weren't just preparing for a return of Safe Start, they were preparing for whatever came next. John didn't think of himself as a leader. He didn't want a spotlight. But when the spotlight came, he pointed it toward the paper trail. The databases. The signatures. The tech behind the surveillance. They uncovered contracts with private behavioral data firms, companies quietly collecting mood scores and interaction heat maps on residents through cameras disguised as neighborhood safety lights. His own home had been tagged as unstable after his son missed a mandatory check-in at school due to the flu. That's how it began. Data points, then labels, then action. He deleted every app linked to the HOA, threw out the smart devices they once called convenience assistants, rewired his home. He helped others do the same. They turned off the lights, literally and metaphorically. Nate helped build a closed communication network, a peer-to-peer encrypted system for whistleblowers. Mia, a former analyst who came on board after her niece was flagged by another HOA across the county, helped them build a toolkit to submit evidence anonymously to sympathetic state legislators. Slowly, cases emerged in other states. Similar protocols. Similar pseudo-legal citations. Phase terms like voluntary realignment and family viability reviews. All under Safe Start spinoffs. This wasn't isolated. This was systemic. They weren't just fighting off one corrupt HOA. They were exposing the blueprint for suburban behavioral control in real time. Underscore 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 underscore. But for all the research, the toolkits, and the interviews, the real work happened in their own home. His son, Jason, was quieter now. Not broken, but cautious. He checked the locks twice before bed. Asked more questions than he used to. Sometimes too many. He'd watched too much. Heard too much. John sat with him most nights. No lectures. Just presence. One evening, Jason finally asked, "Why us?" John hesitated, then said, "Because we didn't fit what they wanted to see." Jason looked at him. "What do they want? Someone quiet. Someone scared. Someone who doesn't ask questions." Jason nodded slowly. "I'll never be that." John believed him. That belief was everything. Even after the lights went dark in Safe Start's command center, John never really believed it was over. The servers might have been unplugged, Karen arrested, and dozens of HOA boards across the country publicly shamed. But the silence that followed didn't feel like victory. It felt like a regrouping. The press eventually moved on. The hashtags faded. But those who had lived it, the families, the veterans, the children, carried the memory in their bodies. Jason still flinched when the front doorbell rang too loud. Leah checked the locks twice every night. John kept his files in 3 different places, encrypted and buried beneath nondescript names. By the time winter returned, Clearwatch had grown into a movement. Not flashy, not loud, but present, everywhere. It wasn't just about HOAs anymore. It was about digital encroachment, soft authority, quiet erasure. It was about the new architecture of fear, the kind you couldn't see, only feel. John found himself speaking at rural schools, neighborhood associations, small-town council meetings. He didn't use big words. He didn't call it surveillance capitalism or predictive compliance networks. He just told the truth. They watched my son like he was a test subject. They dressed it up in safety. And when we didn't obey, they came for him. They'll do the same to you unless you pay attention. The rooms always went quiet after that point. One day a teacher cried. Another day a sheriff offered to install anti-tracking firmware on local school tablets. IT wasn't change at the top. IT was something more dangerous to the old system. Change from below. Underscore 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 Jason was the one who finally asked the question John had been avoiding. Are they coming back? They were walking through the woods behind the house, the trail crusted with fallen leaves and frost. John didn't answer at first. He kicked a branch from the path, hands in pockets. They never left, he said finally. They just changed faces. Jason nodded like he'd expected that. So what do we do? John looked up at the thinning trees, then back at his son. We keep learning. We stay loud. We protect people who can't protect themselves yet. Jason didn't reply, but his chin lifted slightly, as if squaring his shoulders against a wind not yet blowing. Underscore 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 underscore. By early spring, they began receiving letters again, not threats, but pleas. Families from other states. Grandparents raising grandkids. Teachers reporting mandatory wellness scanning, apps installed on classroom computers. A nurse who lost custody of her nephew after failing to attend a community behavioral reintegration session. They had names: Realign, DoveSafe, Newcom Phase Program. Always with soft, hopeful branding. Always with clean websites. And always backed by the same network of consulting firms and behavioral research grants. Safe Start was dead in name only. Its descendants were already moving. John started building what he called the archive. Not just a collection of leaked documents and news clippings, but audio recordings, video interviews, first-person accounts. It was digital and physical, mirrored servers, distributed storage, printed binders wrapped in mylar and buried in basements. Because one thing he'd learned was this: if you don't preserve the evidence, they'll rewrite the story. He built the archive to prevent that. The archive turned John into something he never wanted to be, a witness, not just to what had happened to him and his family, but to what was still happening across the country. People mailed hard drives and thumbsticks. They dropped off unmarked packages, sometimes nothing more than a scribbled note and a burned CD. Others shared through encrypted chat rooms, using pseudonyms like Caretaker 23 and Observer him. Some of the material was hard to look at. Video captures of family confrontations with compliance officers, transcripts of fake parental assessments, AI-generated reports mislabeling veterans as unstable based on biometric feedback during school drop-offs. IT was bigger than Safe Start. IT was algorithmic governance, where behavior didn't have to be dangerous to be punished. It only had to be different. And the more he saw, the more he realized they had simply been a beta test. Jason wasn't just targeted for being a child of a veteran. He had been selected as part of a profile group, independent-minded, emotionally expressive, slow to comply with authority in institutional settings. The very traits that made him strong were what flagged him as unstable. One document, leaked by a Safe Start contractor turned whistleblower, sent chills down John's spine. IT was a page from something called Phase 5 Contingency Overview. The header read, Projected Compliance Drift Models, Strategies for Reset. It spoke of localized failures, strategic memory disruption, and community renewal through narrative reseeding. They're planning to rewrite what happened, John whispered, the page trembling in his hand. They wouldn't erase the families. They'd rewrite the story. Turn resistance into instability. Make the trauma look like madness. He scanned the document, encrypted it, and added it to the archive. That night, he barely slept. Underscore 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 underscore. By midsummer, a state representative reached out to Clearwatch privately. She'd lost a friend to a similar program, one that had masqueraded as a mental health pilot in upstate communities. Her friend had been flagged for emotional volatility after seeking grief counseling following the death of her husband. Within 6 weeks, her house was marked for supportive reallocation. The woman vanished. 2 years later, her home was a co-living pilot zone with no public record of the previous owner. The representative wanted help. Quietly, carefully, John was wary. He didn't trust politics. But he knew the only way to slow the monster was to drag its tail into the light. He worked with her team to prepare a closed-door briefing. It was small, 3 senators, 4 congressional aides, 1 former intelligence analyst. He didn't bring tech or lawyers. He brought the torn notice that started it all, and a photo of Jason. This, he said, holding up the photo, is who they came for. Not because he did anything wrong, but because their system said he might. He passed around the documents, pages of behavior scores, risk heat maps, compliance ratings. They call it preemptive wellness. I call it predictive oppression. When he finished, no one clapped, but one of the aides reached out days later and asked, "Would you testify off the record?" John didn't say yes immediately, but he didn't say no either. Meanwhile, Jason was thriving in ways John hadn't expected. He'd started writing quiet, powerful short stories about characters who refused to follow the script. His teachers noticed. He spoke less than most kids, but when he did, people listened. He even volunteered to speak at a youth event organized by Clear Watch. The night before, he came into John's room, nervous. "What if I mess it up?" he asked. "You won't," John said. "But what if they don't believe me?" John looked at him. "Then tell them the truth anyway. The ones who need it will hear you." Jason nodded quietly. The next day, he stood before 40 strangers and said, "My name is Jason Stratton. My family was tested. Not with exams, but with fear. They tried to take me, not because I was in danger, but because I was hard to control. But I'm not scared anymore. I learned that strength isn't about hiding. It's about remembering." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. The hearing room was colder than John expected. Not just from air conditioning, but from the weight of it. Gray carpet. Government blue chairs. A seal on the wall behind the dais that seemed more distant than official. This was the off-record session. No cameras, no press. Just 5 people in suits, a stenographer, and a pile of printed documents marked exempt from public disclosure. John brought a photo of his family and the original HOA citation. That was it. No slides. No speechwriters. He told them about the knock at the door. The forged letters. The fake officers. The look in Jason's eyes when they tried to take him. The sound of glass breaking. The data trails. The silence that followed. They listened. One senator asked, "Do you think this could happen again?" John paused. "It never stopped," he said. "It just changed its name." He handed them a flash drive containing the archive index, a map of affiliated programs, and a dossier of flagged behavior reports from schools, HOAs, and apartment communities. The senator stared at it like it was a live wire. Another asked, "What would you tell other parents?" John looked up. "Don't wait to be scared. Be noisy before they try to quiet you. And teach your kids to recognize a leash, even if it looks like help." No one spoke after that. They let him walk out in silence. He never found out exactly what happened with the testimony. Parts of it surfaced months later in a policy proposal buried in committee. But most of it vanished into the same bureaucratic haze that let programs like Safe Start exist in the first place. That was fine with him. He wasn't waiting for reform. He was teaching resistance. Clear Watch had grown. What started as a garage operation now included 5 state networks, 2 legal defense alliances, and a digital training module used in 40 school districts. John rarely led anymore, by design. The newer members had more energy, more reach. He stayed back. On the land. In the stillness, the barn became a space for more than tools. It became a story vault. People mailed in their testimonies. Some sent books. Some sent sketches. One child mailed a toy soldier with a note. "This is for Jason. So he knows we fight too." Jason kept it on his desk, and when he left for college 2 years later, he took it with him. John aged in a way that felt earned. His back hurt more. His hands didn't grip like they used to. But he could still plant. Still watch storms roll in. Still sit on the porch and know, beyond any shadow of doubt, that he had held a line. He didn't think of himself as a hero. Just a man who said no. And didn't stop saying it. Some nights, he'd sit with Leah, a radio on low, the stars scattered like quiet witnesses above. They didn't talk much about the worst of it anymore. They didn't need to. They had lived through it, and they had kept others from being swallowed by it. Years later, someone would find the archive in a forgotten county building. They'd read the files, watch the interviews, scan the photos of chalkboard scribbles and scarred mailboxes, and they'd ask, "Why didn't we know?" But the truth was, they had been told, loudly, and those who listened, they'd built something new, something that remembered.